Welcome to the Photoshop Notes Sheet number 3 walkthrough. So the first part of the note sheet is on masks, and we've already covered masks, so those should be things that you can answer on your own. But I wanted to take time to go through the additional items on this sheet. I'm going to move quickly, so feel free to pause as needed if you don't catch something. I'm going to first talk about blending modes, and whenever you draw something or bring in something, I'm just going to draw a red square or a rectangle, like so. So when you draw something or when you drag something in, we have the opacity slider, which modifies the transparency. So 0 is invisible and 100 is completely visible or opaque. That's the transparency slider, the opacity slider is. But this thing that says normal, these are your blending modes. And students seem to get really complicated, like confused about blending modes. We're not talking about blending things together. We're talking about blending modes, which is this button. And the blending modes kind of fall into 3 main categories. Darkening blending modes, those are the ones in this group. Contrast blending modes, that's the ones in the overlay group. And lightening blending modes. Let me just show you. So if I choose the darken blending mode, notice how this red is darkened on the picture. Now I'm going to alt drag and create a copy of this so you can see these side by side. All right, this is a lighten blending mode. Notice how this red lightens anything that it comes into contact with. Okay, let's make another one and show you the contrast blending mode. And that's the one I tend to use most often because it kind of looks cool. Those are the ones in here. Overlay is usually my choice one. And so notice that the white parts stay white and the black parts stay black. Like those areas still have a lot of contrast to them, whereas those areas fade off when you're using a darkening blending mode or a lightening blending mode. So this is what we would consider a contrast blending mode. So again, darken blending modes are things such as darken and multiply is the one I use most often. Lightening blend modes are things under here such as color dodge and screen is kind of the most common one. And then overlay would be the most common contrast blending mode. But like I was making somebody's face like be a witch color, like making myself have a green face, I would probably do a soft light, which is not as strong as doing an overlay. But it looks a little more realistic if it's blended with, say, skin. So basically, blending modes provide different ways for a layer to interact with what's below it. And that's what's happening with these blending modes. So that's the first part of this chapter. I'm going to get rid of these layers and move on to the next part. Additionally, we have healing, retouch, and editing tools. And there's a variety of tools. They're hid over here on the side. Depending on what tool you're clicked on last, these will look different. But we have the blur, sharpen, and smudge tool. Blur looks like a little drop of water. And then sharpen does what you would think it would do, sharpens the pixels. And then smudge lets you smear pixels. Now, all 3 of these buttons can be done non-destructively. You have to click on Sample All Layers. So I'm going to click on that and then make a new layer. And then show you how these work. So blur tool, and this is already kind of a blurry picture, so let me go to 100%. But like a blur tool, if I use a really big brush, the more I brush, the more it's going to blur out. Okay, so if I keep on brushing and keep on brushing, this just gets blurrier, blurrier, blurrier. Now because I did it on its own layer, see, it's actually non-destructive. I can turn it off and I can get this back. Okay. So that's one example. Let me make another layer here and show you the other. The sharpen tool sharpens pixels. I don't advise using it very often because eventually they get real ugly. Like on this one, this picture is small enough that it's not super noticeable. Like you can tell it's a little sharper there. It looks a little better. But if you zoom up really closely when you're using the sharpen tool, it makes the pixels really strong. So see how those pixels have boxes around them? That's what happens with the sharpen tool. Actually, on this one, I didn't click on Sample All Layers, so it actually hasn't done anything yet. Let's click on Sample All Layers, and you'll see what I mean. There. It's going to get, like, insane. There. See? Yuck. So I really don't use the sharpen tool very much, but if you have a picture that's kind of blurry, You might use the sharpen tool to make a difference on that. And then finally, the smudge tool, which again can be done on its own layer if you push the button. It's kind of like a finger painting tool. Like I can take this foot and do this. Yeah, not like this super big fan of these tools, but they exist. And so you're supposed to know that they exist. And now you do. Okay. So remember, those can be done non-destructively by checking that sample all layers. All right, let's look at the other ones over next to that one. The top one that looks like a lollipop is the dodge tool. The dodge tool lightens pixels, and these cannot be done on separate layers. So like this part down here is in the shadow. If you hit it with the dodge tool, you can lighten it up so it doesn't look quite as shadowy. Now, it's getting the grass too, so I have to be careful. I would probably use a smaller brush if I was going to use this for real. But that's what that dodge tool is going to do. It's going to lighten pixels. So as you drag over it, those pixels will lighten up. And if you lighten them too much, they're going to look really fake. The opposite of that is the burn tool. The burn tool does not burn pixels. First off, it darkens pixels. So, you know, if you're darkening a face that has pink to it, eventually it's going to get like ugly red looking color. And then eventually, you know, even darker. But if I darken these pixels here where this red is, see, it gets like more of a maroon, for example. So where that's more common, like the dodge tool, lightening, maybe like your teeth or something like that, if you're just trying to do a little bit of a lightening, or your eyes, if your eyes are a little dark that day, that's the dodge tool. The burn tool, it looks like a hand. I think it's kind of like if you are holding a match in your hands. That's what that burn tool looks like. All right, and then finally the third one here, and again, these are all destructive. There is no way to do these on another layer. The sponge tool, and the sponge tool is a desaturation tool. So as you drag, it removes color. And if you keep dragging, eventually there will be no color. It'll turn black and white. So you just kind of keep dragging over it, and it would desaturate as you drag. Mine's not desaturating very much here. There, I'll use a bigger brush. Now I'm getting everything all ugly, but you can see now it's desaturating. That area is kind of gray. Again, you have to kind of push over it a lot unless you mess with these numbers up here. But the sponge tool is kind of like, you know, when you squeeze out the excess in a sponge. It gets rid of the paint. Well, desaturating is like that, like squeezing the sponge and getting rid of some of that color. So eventually it would be black and white instead of red or whatever other colors are going in there. So that's those tools. Okay? Now that's destructive, so that's stuck there and it's ugly, but that's okay. The last couple of tools that are considered healing and retouch tools, there's one that's under this stamp called a clone stamp, and then this other one that's probably under a Band-Aid most of the time called the spot healing brush, the healing brush, and the patch tool. Let me do the destructive one first. The destructive one that you cannot do on another layer is called the patch tool. The patch tool lets you take an area and select it like a lasso, and then pick it up and drag it on an area that doesn't have that thing. And then it blends them together. So I just made that ball go away. So the patch tool repairs an area with pixels copied from another area, but it is destructive. But it looks at the luminance and the shadows on the background image, and it tries to make it all blend. That's what's nice about the patch tool, is that it actually does blend. Now I'm going to undo that because I'm going to show you other tools too, but that's the patch tool. And I kind of like the patch tool. It's just it's destructive, and so a lot of times you can't really use it. Okay, spot healing brush. That's one that's good for like removing a freckle or a mole or acne or something like that. Basically, you just take your brush, and this one, by the way, see, it has a sample all layers, so that means we can do this one on its own layer, and I always do if you can. And then you just make your brush bigger than the thing you're trying to get rid of, and just click a time or two. Look, zap. And you wish we had one of those for our face when we're having a bad face day. So I just zapped it. I just clicked it one time. And that's it. Okay? Zap. And if you zap it and it doesn't look right, you can always kind of roll your mouse over it a little bit to kind of zap it again and fix that. So that's the spot healing brush. The other two over here are the healing brush. So it's a Band-Aid without a dot behind it. There's the healing brush and there's the clone stamp. And they work exactly the same. And they both will let you do sample all the layers. So you can tell it sample all layers on both of these. So I'm going to go set that. Sample all the layers. Okay. You have to make sure you set that or you can't do it on its own layer, right? So now I've got this layer ready to go. What the healing brush does, the Band-Aid one, is it takes an area, like say this area is good and dark. I can take it and paint with this area over this area. Now the clone stamp does the exact same thing, except the clone stamp doesn't blend it, and the Band-Aid one, the healing brush, does. So in order to do that, what you do is you hold down the Alt key. Okay, you hold down the Alt key, and you click in there. It makes a target sign looking thing. You click it, and then you just start painting, and it's painting over what was there using this, but it tries to blend it. See how it's like smeary and stuff? So I just hit Alt again, and I'm trying to paint over it. So like, to me, this is not the most useful tool. I don't usually use this one. I use the clone stamp. So let me show you how the clone stamp works. So clone stamp works exactly the same way. You hold down Alt and you click somewhere. So let's say like right here, because this is good and this is not. So let's click here, Alt and click. And then it puts it in your mouse. So you can kind of see it, right? See that? Now this one does not blend, but because I'm using a super, super soft brush, it looks like it blends. Now I'm going to use a hard brush for a second just so you can see what I'm talking about. So like, see, I can come here and smack this on here, but if I do, it doesn't blend. There's like a straight line over there on the edge, right? So I'm going to undo that. So if you use a soft brush, then it looks like it's going to blend, at least a somewhat soft brush. So now I'll come here and click and then line that up as best I can and just kind of keep clicking a few times until it takes over. There we go. And then same thing down here. I want to line up on this line so that I can reproduce the line here. So I'm going to click Alt and click. It'll load it up in my mouse, kind of cover up that little area as best I can. Click a couple times, and there we go. We set it down. And then I'm going to repeat this process over here just to get rid of that part. And bam, there we go. Catcher is gone. And we could do that same thing like down here if I wanted to kind of get rid of this base. You just want to be careful with the clone stamp that you don't keep just going from one area, or it's just going to like repeat. You know, like if I started over here and then I paint, eventually it's like, see how it's exact duplicate? It's like I copied and pasted it. You don't want it to look like that. So like I might go get a little bit of dirt from here and patch it in there, and then maybe a little dirt from over here farther and patch it in here, so it doesn't have that white there like that other piece does. And that's kind of how you can trick the system. So anyway, that's kind of a basic overview of the healing and retouch tools from our notes sheet. Additionally, the last page of the note sheet goes over smart objects and smart filters. And I'm going to just take and create, I'm going to grab this and do select a mask, and I'm just going to put it on a new layer with layer mask so that we have both. All right, so now I've got this top part, it's just that, right? That's the top part. So if you have a layer that's a smart layer, and you just right click in the gray space and you tell it to make it a smart object, convert to smart object. Okay, so first the layer has to be converted to a smart object. Then smart filters can be created through the menu filter. And then there's different filters in here. Okay, and so let's say I choose, I'll just do stylize, and then we'll do extrude or something. So it'll come up. That wasn't a good one to choose because it doesn't have a preview. If you get one that has a preview, it's kind of cooler. Here, I'll just do this mosaic. All right, so there's the preview of it. So you can see the before and after, and you can make those changes. But what's cool about it is that when you hit OK, it puts the filter on a layer mask, so it's non-destructive. Like you can turn it off. If you go use that filter button without making it a layer mask, and let me do that. Let me go back in history for a sec to before I made it a smart object. So one more step back here. If I go and add that filter right now, see, it's glued to this. So I can't get rid of it now, right? I'm going to have to back up. So that's why having that filter is cool. So again, right click in the gray space, convert to smart object, and then you can go to filter. There is a filter gallery too, by the way, that has a bunch of cool things that you can pull up and do, like artistic things, or you can turn it into like painting or, you know, whatever. More than likely, you would probably do this the opposite way. Like you would maybe do the rest of the picture as a painting, and this picture part would be normal. So let me undo that. And then let's say we make this one a smart object. And then I just filter that whole part. So I'm like, okay, we'll make this all look like this kind of cool painting thing. We hit okay. And then, you know, that part's kind of cool painting part, and then this part is like real. Although I kind of like this whole painting part look on this one. It's pretty neat looking for this particular picture. But anyway, just understand they're reversible and they have masks. So technically I could paint on this mask. I could take a black paintbrush, and if there's areas I don't want to be using that filter, then I click on the mask and I just paint them out. So if I want the bat to be normal, I can just paint on that. Or if I want this part to be normal, I can just paint on that. And so see, it's on the layer mask so you can hide it. So yeah, smart filters automatically come with their own layer mask, and that's cool because you can then paint things out where you don't want the filter to apply. So there you go, folks. That is a review of Note Sheet 3 for the most part, minus the mask part, which you should already know. There is a program called Photopea, and Photopea is similar to Photoshop, but it works in the browser. And Photopea does have some of the things that Photoshop has, and you should be able to use it on your Chromebook. The problem will be that you have to download like you can't just save this file. So like I can open a file and work on it, but I can't, you know, I can't like save it to the cloud, you know. It doesn't work exactly like that. Let me grab one of these pictures. This is not the greatest picture to grab, but we'll just grab it. So you have your layers just like you have in Photoshop. And over here we do have, like, for instance, this clone stamp. And the buttons don't necessarily work exactly the same, but it says clone tool, and I can have my source be all the layers. So I can do that there. It tells you Alt is the, to select the source. So I could come down here at the bottom of my layers panel and make a new layer just like I did before. Right, and then I can make my brush bigger. So I can hold down my Alt key and click on this little guy's head, and then come over here and I can paint another little guy in there. So it works just like it does in Photoshop. Now I painted that hard, and since it has a solid background, it worked okay. But usually you'd want to use a soft brush just so it would blend in a little bit better. So again, hold down Alt, and you point to whatever it is you want to copy, and then you just start painting. Oops! Don't let up your mouse, though, like I did, until you're done. There we go. And see, I went too far. But it's on its own layer, so see, that's not a big deal because I can just take an eraser now, and I can erase those parts that I don't need or whatever. So it's not as perfect as doing it in Photoshop, but we do have the clone brush in there. We also have your blur and your sharpen and your smudge tool, but you can't do them on different layers. And we do have your dodge and your burn and your sponge tool, but you can't do those on different layers either. But they're in here, so that is an option. For this little guy here, you can still convert to smart objects, and it says creating smart object, and it puts an icon in the corner just like it does in Photoshop. And we do still have filters, and we have different filters, but we do have some filters in here. Not quite as many, not quite as cool. But like the mosaic one, for instance, I can, you know, make that mosaic, and now it's underneath just like it is in Photoshop. So you can still play around even though you're not in Photoshop and do some Photoshop-ish things, even down to, you know, the blending mode. I can click on here and draw a rectangle that's red just like I did in Photoshop. We have normal here, and then we have our blending modes. So we still have blending modes in here. So you can still do a lot of the same things. I will tell you masking is a little bit weird in here, but you can still paint on the mask just like we've done before in black or white to hide things or whatever. So anyway, I encourage you to play around a little bit with Photopea, photopea.com. It will work on a Chromebook, and it will at least give you a little bit of experience with using these tools. So good luck. Shoot me an email if you have questions or need some help. Oh, and when you save these, you'll have to save them and save them to your computer or your Chromebook. And then you can open them back up again by going to File and Open. So just know that that's a little bit of a thing. I don't know if the Publish Online will work. You could try, but I'm not totally sure. But we do still have export buttons and all that good stuff too. So if we get too desperate, we can go in here and create some things and then export them out and be able to submit them on Canvas for grading if we get to that point. All right, good luck, kiddos.